Because everything's not fine. You didn't finish what I asked you to do, and now the show's about to start, and we got issues.
People barking orders at me, that's all. If I'm curt with you, it's because time is a factor. I think fast, I talk fast. Instead of please... Get it straight, Buster. I'm not here to say please. I'm here to tell you what to do. If self-preservation is an instinct you possess, you better do it quick.
My name's Jimmy, and you're tapped into the Truth Frequency on Truth Frequency Radio at truthfrequencyradio.com. Come on into the microcosm. You guys are tapped into the Truth Frequency. It's high noon on Monday, and we're getting ready to roll out the hot lunch for today. I just want to remind you, if you go over to truthfrequencyradio.com, we've got water filters on sale, an unbelievable price. It's so low, I'm not even allowed to mention it on the air. You're just going to have to go over and check it out over at the truthfrequencyradio.com. I'd also like to let you know we're on iHeartRadio. You can get the iHeartRadio app, and if you have time, you can make a quick comment over there. It really helps the standing of the station. It helps us rise in the ranks. And rising in the ranks is what we want to do because we want to get the message out. We want to get the word out. We've got so many great hosts here on Truth Frequency Radio. I'd like to put a shout out to Christian Sharif for putting this whole thing together and making it possible. So let's get into it. We're going to get into the forbidden history of man, mankind's forbidden history that's not written, that we haven't been able to have at our disposal and haven't been able to learn about. I think it's very important. I think the tablets of Hermes or the 13 tablets of Thoth are very important. I also think the Colburn Bible is very important. And I think it's just all around really great information. And if you don't know about it, you're going to learn something. Maybe if you know about it, you might learn something too. So why don't you hang on to your hat, grab your hot lunch, grab yourself a soda or a coffee or something to drink, cold beer maybe, if you're in California. You know what you do. All right, let's get it on.
When Thoth first saw signs of the polar shift, they returned to the land of Shem and raised the worship into the sky. They went to Atlantis and picked up the Nacals. The Nacals weren't just passengers though, and each and every being was working in unity to create a very powerful Merkaba around themselves and the ship. They returned to the Great Pyramid and landed the ship on top, forming the phi ratio with the pyramid. And then, it happened. The poles began to shift, and human consciousness began to plummet. Simultaneously, the electromagnetic and magnetic fields of the Earth collapsed, and all life on the planet went into the Great Void, the 3.5 days of absolute blackness described by many ancient cultures in the world. The Emerald Tablets say that whenever we go through a polar shift, we go through a void space as we change our frequencies for about 3.5 days. This is also in the Troano document, depicted by 3.5 stones painted black. This refers to a time when we go through what science calls the electromagnetic null zone. During the pole shift, a phenomenon takes place where everything just seems to disappear for a certain time. Usually it's between 2 to 4 days, and the last time it was 3.5 days. Here's where it gets interesting. What happens to us does not usually happen to a normal species, because most advanced species will have their Merkabas handy at the time of the shift. We didn't, due to our little crisis, and we got sucked into the void space without protection. This resulted in us losing our memories. Science realizes that all of our memories are connected through cells in our brains as well as fields around our heads. What is not entirely understood by science yet, at least not directly, is the connection our memories have with the planet itself. We've discussed this before. The magnetics of the Earth affect how we think and act. The Merkaba is an electromagnetic field that you create around your body that can serve as protection from void as you're consciously going through it. What happened to us when we didn't have that protection? It was a clean wipe. When we existed on Atlantis, we were living at a very high level of consciousness in a higher dimension. We had extremely advanced and sophisticated bodies and minds, and were capable of practically anything, living in a dimension where molecules were spaced so far apart that consciousness could interact with them without physically moving. It's hard to explain because you can literally shape your environment immediately through your consciousness in these higher frequencies. In that sense, we were creators, knowing and understanding oneness, beings of love. But then we fell. We dropped back down to this place called the third dimension. We also fell in consciousness back to zero. We forgot how to use the pineal gland, and it slowly shrunk to the size it is now, like a raisin, where it's supposed to be eyeball size. When this happened, we forgot how to breathe source energy into our bodies, and our lifespans went kaput. Eventually, we went from 900 years to what it is today. We had not experienced this dense reality that we had before, at least for a very long time. We were kind of like a supercomputer that gets completely wiped. No operating system or anything. We had these advanced physical bodies, but we didn't know how to use them. This is why today we are so physically advanced compared to pretty much all the other animals in this third dimension. For a time, the survivors of the Atlantean fall, and there were a few, were literally hairy barbarians. We even had to rediscover fire. The reason we're having such a hard time finding evidence of Atlantis is because for the most part, the events of Atlantis took place on a much higher dimension than our physical Earth exists on right now. Everything I've drawn of Atlantis can't be taken as that's what it looked like, because it didn't. This landmass did physically exist, but the Atlanteans were not inhabiting that dimension of its existence. If the warship hadn't been protected by the Merkaba, the Nicals would have lost their memories. They retained their memories when the Earth came out of the void and began their work once more. Thoth and 1/3 of the Nicals went to the Island of the Sun in Bolivia, Aragot and 1/3 went to Tibet, and Ra and the remaining third went to Egypt, where they waited. Now, we're going to begin bridging the gaps between this story and our current history. In between the fall of Atlantis and the dawn of our first civilizations, who were the Egyptians and the Sumerians, there was a 6,500-year gap between them. What was happening to us in that time? We have to look at this precession chart again. This is where we fell in consciousness, point C, and this was our falling asleep phase 2. Thoth, Ra, and the Ascended Masters were waiting until point D. They had to wait for humans to just evolve themselves over a 6,500-year time period until they were advanced enough to actually receive this new information that they were going to provide. Sometime in here was when the flood of Noah occurred. Because of the pole shift, the Earth went through an ice age. This is scientific fact. When the ice melted, it would have caused massive flooding. DNA is the physical manifestation of who you are. It is your soul's physical aspect. What we are seeing in DNA is changes in the codons. There's 64 possible codons in DNA, and humans only have about 22 or so. What we're finding is that there are 6 more codons being activated within these children, and they are choosing 2 of the 6. These kids are what we call indigo and crystal children, and probably the super psychics as well. Now, this is a chromosome. Basically, what this is lots and lots of DNA wrapped into this weird H-like shape. This is located in every cell, and it's part of your body of consciousness. What Thoth tells us is that every level of consciousness seen here not only has its own consciousness grid, but its chromosome change as well. The second level, where we are now, has 44 and 2 chromosomes. To any scientist, this is basic biology. The first level, however, has 42 and 2, and this third level has 46 and 2. The fourth and fifth have 48 and 2 and 50 and 2, respectively. The primary physically visible difference between these DNA in all life is height. The first level has an average height of 4 to 6 feet tall. The second level, us, has an average height of 5 to 7 feet. Third are about 10 to 16 feet, which we are about to translate to. Fourth is 30 to 35 feet, and the last is 50 to 60. You may remember a being named Metatron, the Hebrew archangel who is the perfection of what humanity is to become. He was 55 feet tall, that guy. The last 2 heights are far in the distant future for us, though. This is a place in Egypt today called Abu Simbel. The first thing you notice is that these statues are huge, but with the information about the DNA, this paints a different picture. These beings would be in the 60-foot range if they were to stand. They were at the 5th level of consciousness. These beings on a different wall are 35 feet tall, 4th level of consciousness. Here are some 3rd levels as well. Archaeologists saw this and thought that it meant that the man was just much more important than the woman, when in actuality, the kings of Egypt had 5 different names, one for every level of consciousness. Some of the kings were even able to translate into different dimensions, and that's how they guided the population with the power of the gods. In Egypt, according to today's top archaeologists and researchers, the Egyptians and Sumerians both began their civilizations right around the same time from each other, within a few hundred years or so. Both of these civilizations emerged out of nowhere with perfect writing abilities that were not improved upon since. When they first emerged, they were extremely sophisticated and clear, and slowly degenerated over generations. No archaeologist can explain how this happened or explain how it could have happened. They placed Egypt and Sumer into a special classification called stair-step evolution. What happened was, one day, Egypt got its language, full and complete. Then the knowledge leveled off, and then it got another massive leap a little while later. Then suddenly, they knew everything about water and moat systems just perfect. Then, a little time later, bam, they're masters of hydraulics. How did Egypt and Sumer do this? Well, this is what Thoth said. When we were evolving on our own for 6,500 years, Ra and the Ascended Masters were waiting in an underground city beneath the Great Pyramid. We'll come back to this in a bit. Thoth's son Tat formed a group called the Tat Brotherhood, which is a secret group that still exists today as protectors and keepers of the sacred temples. Today, they're still connected to the Ascended Masters. So about 6,000 years ago, some members of the Tat Brotherhood would wait until they would meet someone who could understand what they were going to teach them. When they found someone, they would just tune their frequencies to the third dimension and walk up and tell them information flat out. They said, hey, if you do this and this happens. The Egyptians would say, wow, look at that. Then they would go underground, wait another little while, and repeat the process. Over a short period of time, the Egyptian and Sumerian evolution shot up in stair steps. As for the Sumerians, they also received a more detailed story by those who were assisting them. They described to the Sumerians in all of the details they remembered. They said, this is the history of the planet, write it down. The Sumerians knew about the precession of the equinox because they were told it by the Nacals from Atlantis. After this stair-step period, we began to fall asleep further. Things got worse once more. It was our falling sleep stage of precession, and although the Nacals had given us a boost, we were consciously dozing off. On that note, it's time for the story about the city under the pyramid. Keep an open mind about this because there is very little proof for what I'm about to say. For over 40 years, Drunvalo Melchizedek has been studying human consciousness through sacred geometry and spiritual teachers and masters all over the world. In 1996, he was contacted by a source in Egypt who said that something incredible had been discovered. A stone stele came out of the ground between the paws of the Sphinx into the daylight. They removed it and dug into the earth beneath the Sphinx. There they found a room with 3 tunnels leading off of it. One of the tunnels, which went to the Great Pyramid, had another tunnel coming off it, and it was shielded by a wall of light. Bullets could not pass through this field, and people could not even get close to it without feeling like they're going to die. The Egyptian government found a particular person who could turn off this field. They also had brought in Paramount Studios to film it, as they had filmed the opening of King Tut's tomb. They had a good relationship with Egypt. The government wanted several $1 million from Paramount, but at the last minute they asked for an extra $1.5 million under the table. Paramount was outraged and they backed off. Things were silent for about 3 months. Then, Drunvalo heard from a source again who was involved in all this, who said that 3 men shut off the light field and went inside. They found themselves inside a very large building that went on for miles underground, which was really the edge of a giant underground city, which was really just one giant building. Then, a little while later, an Egyptian archaeologist named Larry Hunter began describing the same thing, but more detailed. He said that the city was 6.5 by 8 miles wide and 12 stories deep, and the city was outlined by specific temples in Egypt. The 3 pyramids are lined up with Orion's belt, but there are also small temples for every other star in the constellation. Those temples map out the city underground and are made out of a special stone not found anywhere else in Egypt called Koinen stone. Incredibly enough, very recently, ancient tunnels were found in Romania that led to both Egypt and the inner earth. Now, I don't have time to go into detail about this particular story, but if you want, check out the book Transylvanian Sunrise by Radu Sinemar. To be clear, this is a theory that has not been accepted by the Egyptian government, but the underground city that Thoth said was there is, according to Mr. Hunter, marked by temples made of a unique substance, and the temples match the star pattern of the constellation of Orion. 4,000 years after the stair-step evolution, we were at our lowest stage of our evolution. We were hitting bottom on the awareness road. Suddenly, out of the darkness, 3 men came to Earth to give us a little nudge. Everything in ancient Egypt was synthetic. They had this entire civilization based around achieving heightened states of consciousness, but they had to do it through tools. Now, we're not going to look at each of these tools individually, but let me give you a brief overview here. This tool was used for transferring vibrations into the body. Along with that were the hook and flail. This little device was a kind of generator to increase vibrations, though there's not too much information available on it. This thing, however, was their most important tool, the Ankh. They saw the Ankh as the secret to eternal life, and they used it not as a physical tool, but as an energetic one. They would use this form and Ankh their sexual energy. Now, this could be a huge topic on its own, like how energy travels up and down the body through a vertical tube between 5 energy channels that counter-rotate as they extend through the body. But basically, sexual energy is an incredibly powerful energy. We definitely abuse it today, but what the Egyptians knew was that when you had an orgasm, a very large amount of energy bursts from your root chakra all the way up your spine to the top of your head, and then it gets released. What the Egyptians would do was when the spiral of energy hit their heart chakra, they would Ankh the energy out of the back of their body and over their head and back into their body, where they would keep the energy and retain a massive energy boost. In other words, if you take a tuning fork and hit it, it will reverberate for a certain amount of time. Then, if you attach an Ankh on top of it and hit it again, it will reverberate at least 3 times longer. The Egyptians were doing this with their bodies. Moving on, when Atlantis was first formed, the Nacals set up something called a mystery school. This is the special type of school where you learn about consciousness, and you learn different aspects of expanding your own consciousness, and eventually getting to a place where you become immortal. It usually took a very long time to achieve this state, and that's why there were only about 1,000 Nacals in comparison to the millions of Lemurians at the start of Atlantis. The first Atlantean to reach the immortal state was a man named Osiris. Ancient Egypt's mythology tells a story about Osiris, a man who was killed and cut up into pieces by his brother in an act of rage, and then the pieces were scattered. This event, perhaps less exaggerated than the myths, actually did happen, and it took place on Atlantis. Osiris's wife and sister retrieved the pieces, and upon returning the final piece, they restored the creative energy flow and brought his spirit back into the body. Through doing this, Osiris became immortal, and he was the first immortal of Atlantis. This story is told throughout ancient Egypt on many temple walls, and I'm going to show you why. Osiris went through the 3 stages of consciousness. The first one was whole, the second was separated from itself, included physically, and the third was whole again. The Nacals used Osiris's understanding of how he became immortal as a template for how others could do it as well, only through consciousness, without needing to be cut up, of course. This eventually became what we would call the religion of Atlantis, but it was more of a deeper understanding that they were following. This template was also used in Egypt, which we will look at now. Through this stair-step evolution, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. Before the fall, we had incredible memories. It wasn't this vague recollection that we have now, but today we might see it as full-tilt 3D holographic memory. After the fall, we still had a photographic memory, and could share these experiences with each other, which is called dream time. It is what the Aborigines of Australia still have today. Through the introduction of writing, however, we began to change from the first level of consciousness into the second. We lost our incredible memories and became very separate from each other and ourselves. Thoth was the one who introduced writing, and if you look at ancient Egyptian culture, it even says, Thoth brought writing to us, as well as many other things. Now that we were in the second level, over time things began to change, and a very serious problem developed, which if it hadn't been solved, it would have caused a major catastrophe in our own near future. Basically, in Egypt, the Ascended Masters had used Osiris's genetic coding of changing chromosomes to show others the path of ascension. They developed a system of 42 and 2 gods, with a lowercase g. They were actually called Neters. Most will recognize this one. His name was Anubis. There were 42 and 2 Neters, who were representative of human chromosomes. Each one of them showed a specific pathway of life or human experience, and people would follow these understandings to learn more about their life or their own reality. The problem developed when both Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt became more separated from themselves, and the meanings of these Neters were lost. Over time, the drawings of these Neters changed, and the meanings changed with them. People had no idea what they meant. Then it got worse, when the Egyptian king Menes merged Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt into a unified country. Menes also merged the belief systems, so now you had 88 gods that people were fighting over to decide who was really God. This was an issue, because now they had people not knowing what to believe, completely lost, separated from their understanding of their own divinity and God. Things became separated further, people fought over which gods were really gods. Today, we look back and say, wow, they thought there were so many gods, when really, this wasn't the case at all. Even with the help from the Tat Brotherhood, we just couldn't get it right. There was one short period of Egyptian culture that most historians don't really understand. As it's written in ancient texts and hieroglyphs, for 17.5 years there was a bizarre new ruler that completely changed how Egypt was run, and his name was Akhenaten. Before him, there were only kings. Akhenaten was the first pharaoh, which meant that which you will become. He was also, believe it or not, 15 to 16 feet tall, at least that's how he was always depicted, and had an elongated skull. Both of these aspects are related to Christ consciousness. Akhenaten abolished all previous understandings of God and tried to instill a one-God understanding in everyone. After 17 years, the majority of Egyptians revolted and Akhenaten was killed, soon to be replaced by someone else, returning to the old system. What actually happened? To correct the problem, Thoth got the help from Ai and Tia, who were the first immortals from Lemuria, and got them to mate interdimensionally to conceive a Christ consciousness being. Thoth said that he worked with the previous kings of Egypt to help achieve this, and Egyptologists find that Akhenaten came completely out of nowhere. It took some time, and there was a transitional period involving Amenhotep III, but soon Akhenaten was on the throne. Akhenaten used his time to bring Egypt back to a simple religion where there was one God, one reality. He used imagery of a sun disk to represent this. The priests in Egypt didn't like that because the religious beliefs were centered on the priests. Then he comes along and says, you don't need priests, God is within you, and you can access God from within your own selves. Well, they didn't like that. He also pulled the military back and said, don't attack unless someone else attacks first. The military didn't like him either. Plus, the people generally didn't like him because they enjoyed worshipping their many gods. Eventually, they disposed of him. After all that, what did Akhenaten do that evidently saved humankind? Well, he developed the mystery school, with the intention of showing a small group of humans a way to ascend into the immortal state. Usually, it took hundreds of years to reach the level of immortality, and Akhenaten had 17 years to produce results. This was a very close call, but he did it. He actually showed 300 individuals the path to immortality in this short time. So after the general population disposed of Akhenaten, these 300 immortals would go beyond Egypt. Thoth wrote in the Emerald Tablets that after ancient Egypt ended, he brought a man named Pythagoras into the Great Pyramid and taught him the geometry of the universe. That man then went on to found Greece, which was originally built upon schools for teaching geometry and the Platonic solids and all of that stuff. Thoth lived a lifetime here as well, where he was known as Hermes Trismegistus. Akhenaten's immortals became a group called the Essene Brotherhood. They first migrated to a place called Masada in Israel. Even today, Masada is known as the capital of the Essene Brotherhood. Now get this. In this brotherhood, there were two people in particular, a man and a woman. You might have heard of them. Mary and Joseph? See, it was part of the Ascended Master's plan that they would bring in a being who would show the pathway to Christ consciousness. He would come to Earth as a second-level being, a regular Joe, and achieve Christ consciousness through the course of his life. Then, the ascension process, the transitional experience from the second to third level, would go into the consciousness grid that was still being formed. He was able to transition because he was originally from these higher levels. That man is known today as Jesus, although his name at that time was Yahshua ben Hur. If Yahshua had not shown up, we would not have had that ascension experience available to us today. None of us would be aware that these higher levels of understanding even existed, and we would destroy ourselves. According to what Thoth said, Mary and Joseph mated interdimensionally. Mary could have been a virgin, physically, but she mated with Joseph in a way that would allow a soul from a higher reality to come down to earth and have a human experience. Usually, this is impossible to do otherwise. Through Yahshua's work, he came here just like us, a total human being, but he went through these three important stages: final death, resurrection, and ascension, and gave us these experiences so that we could access them down the road. Now, as we all know, the story of Jesus has a missing piece. He was a child, disappeared for some time, and then showed up again when he was 30. In a book called The 18 Absent Years of Jesus Christ, the leading theories about where he went was actually out east to either the Himalayan or Tibetan mountains, where he became an enlightened guru. He brought his teachings back to the world after that. If you remember from part 1, the Kundalini of the planet was residing in Tibet at that time. They were very spiritually adept people living there, and remain so today. Now, on the topic of Christ, there's something else I'd like to bring up: the Lord's Prayer. Today, we know this as the only prayer that Jesus taught, but did you know it's actually a geometric prayer meditation? A man named Bodhi McCoy spent over 20 years working with this prayer and analyzing it with sacred geometry, and has discovered some incredible synchronicities. In his book, Live the Promise, he explains how the original prayer, not the extended version mind you, has 7 segments or thoughts, which align perfectly with the 7 chakras as well as the 7 original branches of yoga. Bodhi teaches how to do this prayer meditation, as well as meditations him and his wife have developed based on the Lord's Prayer, called heart dances. It's really quite incredible to see how it all works with the pure geometries of the universe. If you wish to learn more, check out livethepromise.net. If you study Christian religion and Egyptian religion, you'll actually find that they parallel in almost every way except for the Egyptians' understanding of God. Most evidence shows that Christian religion came out of Egyptian religion, and then later they went back and discredited the Egyptians. Around 300 AD, there was a council called the Council of Nicaea, which was the syndication between the Roman political and religious authorities. Basically, the religious leaders and political leaders realized that they could unite and impose more influence on the people and control society through their unity. It's right around this time that we begin to see the manifestation of the New Testament, which was put together from scriptures and stories, some newer and some much older, which were renewed and superimposed on the life of Yahshua ben Hur, which today we know as Jesus of Nazareth. The term Christ actually stems back from much before the Bible. It comes from the word Christala, which is a word that derives from the original 7 core audible sounds of creation. When the creation of the universe occurred, the original tones were Ka, Ra, Ya, Sa, Ta, Ha, La. Christla actually was broken down on earth into 2 words: Christ, which soon became Christ, and Hla, which became Allah, which were broken down and changed through oral tradition. The symbol for Atlantis was 3 rings inside of the other. The inside were the Nakals, the middle ring were called Maya, and the outer ring were the Atlanteans. The Maya's job was communicating the messages from the inner circle out to the regular people of Atlantis. When Atlantis sank, the Maya took their knowledge, a crystal skull with memories of Atlantis, and their calendar, and went out to what today is called the Yucatan Peninsula, birthplace of the Mayan civilization. Their calendar is the most advanced, detailed calendar on the planet, and it has its roots in Atlantis. Over the last few hundred years, a group of people have slowly monopolized the entire world into what it is now. Today, there are 13 families that are among the richest families in the world. They have their hands in next to every organization and government and control over 95% of the money. They control our modern world from the very tippy top. Today, we like to call them the Illuminati, except that's not really who they are. The word Illuminati means enlightened ones, which was established long ago as a secret society that was focused around expanding knowledge through scientific and spiritual understandings. Secret societies were not originally bad, but rather consisted of those who just kind of got it. They understood information that the average person at that time would not accept and demonize. These societies had to be kept a secret because of the control that the church had and refuted against what they wanted to explore. This is where Freemasonry originally comes from. If you do the research on the time periods, what probably happened was that the church, who had the majority of the control at the time, probably infiltrated some of these organizations to make sure that they were not creating plans to expose information and destroy the world order that they had created. This led to the church exposing some of the societies as devil worship and blasphemous, and fear of these groups rose. Over time, many secret societies branched off by those who were corrupt or previously infiltrated by the church, and gained more control through the church and large organizations that were being established. Today, there exist 13 families around the world who pretty much own the world, with over 95% of the money and a lust for greed, power, and control. More and more information has become present lately that many of these families may have DNA that is different than the rest of the human population. It is speculated that they share DNA that was passed down from the Martian race or other species races. They contain no love or emotion and are completely power-driven. This brings us to the end of the human history story for spirit science, but of course, it's not really the end. For one, we've only really scratched the surface of discussing many of these topics. Secret societies, for example, would take another 2 or 3 lessons to really get into. Plus, the human history story won't end because we're still living it, and what happens next is ultimately up to you. This story, while seemingly unbelievable and at times outrageous, does explain a lot. Think about it. We've covered the Bermuda Triangle, the face on Mars, Jesus, what the Egyptians were doing, the rise of Greece, pretty much most modern religions, the reason we popped up out of nowhere 6,500 years ago, the stair-step evolution of those cultures, and the story of Atlantis, which has been elusive to us at the best of times. It also explains the Great Pyramids and their connection to all of the sacred sites on the planet, the Sumerian tablets, the Emerald tablets, Lucifer, and as for the Hebrews, if you read their Talmud, it actually seems to suggest that they're not from here.
And we're going to be right back. You're listening to Truth Frequency Radio on truthfrequencyradio.com.
In, so without. As you feel inside, as outside your reality will be. So change your thoughts. The third principle is the principle of vibration. And this principle states the following: nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. So everything moves. Everything grows or dies. Look at the sun. It appears in the morning and it falls in the night, at night. The day is not fixed. We always see the day and night transition. That's movement right there. Look at the sun's impact that has on your feelings. You get up in the morning. You watch that beautiful light, you feel energy, joy. A new day is born. How to apply this principle of vibration in your life? Well, that feeling that you get, that joy that you feel in your heart when you see the sun in the morning, is vibration right there. The key of this principle is to unite the thought with the feeling. Infuse the mind with the heart. Visualize and feel what you just visualized. That's how you create the desired vibration consciously. And by practice, you can master this more and more. Let me give you an example. that happened to me a few days ago. I really adore coconuts, and all morning I thought of coconuts, and in my mind I felt like in my heart, I felt like I almost tasted the coconut water. So I thought of coconuts, and I attached to that thought the feeling of tasting the smell of coconuts. Okay. To my amazement, one coworker came to my desk and put right in front of me a bottle with coconut water because she thought that will do me good in the morning. You think that was coincidence? No, there is no such thing as chance. You, using the power of vibration, can bring things to your table. You have to understand one thing: the mind creates images. Looking at those images, you can create feelings. The heart creates vibrations, and you have to understand that all around you vibrates. The trees vibrate. Using this power of feeling, you can create more synchronicities in your life. You just think and feel the thought. Then you create whatever you desire. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. You see this principle everywhere. The day, the night. Hot and cold. South Pole, North Pole. This principle is all about the transmutation of a thought into its opposite. How to apply this principle in your life? Let's take the following example in order to understand better how this principle can work for you. You are in the parking spot and you see this mature lady entering in this really old car. The paint is faded and it's so old that it almost looks dirty. And the following thought appears in your mind, and the feeling of disgust rises. What an ugly, rusty old car. Okay, now, what's the opposite of that thought? You can now transmute that thought by thinking, how many beautiful memories must this lady have with that car that she still uses it today? Suddenly, you start to feel appreciation for that car. You start to think that although it's so old, it still works like a charm today. Suddenly, the car starts to have value in your mind. So you just switched from a thought to another. Or let's say that you are at the beginning with your business and you feel so discouraged that from your first transaction you gain a small amount of money. You can change that feeling of discouragement using this principle of polarity with the feeling of joy and ambition to continue with your business, because this transaction is only the first step to even more transactions and growth.
Thing is, if you're not a surfer, you're probably not aware of this certain moment that happens. You're sitting out in the ocean and you're observing the waves, and you decide that there's a wave that you want to catch, and you start to paddle into the wave. And as you do, the wave starts to rise and it starts to suck you up onto the wave. And there's this moment where you have to decide if you're going to take the wave or you're going to go off the back of the wave and stay safe. And when you make the decision to go for it, if you make the wrong decision, you're never going to know, because 30 feet is 3 stories, and a lot of times you don't survive. But if you make the right decision, well, you'll never know the joy that you will feel coming out of that wave that looked like it was going to kill you. You decided to go for it. And it's that same kind of mentality that we got to apply to our lives when we can, and we got to go for it. You know, we got to break out of the mediocrity and move forward and step into a new future, not the future that's being jammed down our throats, okay? It's not prophecy, it's a business plan. We have the power to make our lives any way we want to make them. We can choose in that moment, just like the surfer, to go for it. Who knows what might happen? It's not what it is, okay? You hear all these people going around, yeah, man, it is what it is, it is what it is, it is what it is, it is what it is. You know, it ain't what it is, it's what you make it, okay? Life's not what it is, it's what you make it. Make it great. Rise above the noise. Figure it out. You're the only one that's responsible for your actions, nobody else. If you don't take action, it's gonna sit there and rot away in your little hole. This is Jimmy Gene. You're listening to Microcosm.
The Antichrist. You tell the angels in heaven you never seen evil so singularly personified.
Behold the promised land within the living man. Heaven is in your heart. Love is within your hands. Behold the Lamb of peace within the lion's teeth. But he shall not be devoured. Fulfilling prophecy. Just say the sun shall not shine by day and not the moon by night. And all his love is revealed that the way you by rest him and live upright. And now all the creatures of the earth shall be held as sacred within eyesight. But then you're the infinite days, the balance between darkness and light. Oh, you're fighting for survival. To escape sadness and hurt. Well, they only have one rival. Mankind, oh, mankind. So as long as I and inhabit the earth, we shall harmony. Soldiers at the most side blending the seeds of peace. Oh, look inward and see. Behold the promised land within the living man. Heaven is in your heart. Love is within your hand. When this thing it seems we're always fighting against confusion. So much propaganda, it's hard to tell truth from illusion, yeah. But look in your heart and you will always find the solution. Oh, your love will never lead you in the wrong direction, no. Oh, all shall be revealed in time. So fear not for the sorrows. Jah will open all their eyes. So hush my people, don't you cry. Yeah. Bra-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. Oh, I can be gained from living your life like a murderer, sustained by the blood of the innocent victims of vampire. Paranoia and shame shall follow you far beyond this region, and the blood stains on your soul shall remain to one dimension. Oh, yeah, that fight in the world and tribal was to establish science. Oh, yeah, this way is so suicidal. Mankind, behold the promised land within the living man. Heaven is in your heart. Love is within your hand. Behold the Lamb of Peace within the lion's teeth. But he shall not be devoured, fulfilling prophecy. Yeah.
Consciousness is not an attainment. Consciousness is an action. Being conscious takes work. Be conscious.
What we perceive to be reality is actually just The Sims on a grand scale.
What does that mean?
The argument is pretty straightforward. Computing technology has advanced so much in the last 40 years that at some point we're going to be able to create video game simulations that are indistinguishable from reality. And if that's the case, how do we know it hasn't already happened?
Wow.
Two tech billionaires have gone so far as to secretly engage scientists to work on breaking us out of the simulation, Altman told The New Yorker. Elon Musk thinks it's almost inevitable that civilization as we know it is actually just one giant simulation.
40 years ago, we had Pong, like two rectangles and a dot. That was what games were. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. And soon we'll have virtual reality, we'll have augmented reality. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. The odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions. Tell me what's wrong with that argument.
He also said that that's probably a good thing, because the alternative is the complete destruction of humanity.
Either we're going to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will cease to exist.
And if our brains and our impulses are completely simulated, breaking out of the matrix, as these billionaires are pushing for, would mean ceasing to exist. Innumerable scientists, physicists, and futurists agree that it's almost certain the universe is a simulation.
If simulating universes becomes a pastime among those who have access to highly powerful computers, and we are in a universe, we are probably in a simulated universe, even if one of those universes is actually real.
This universe could have been created by some super intelligence in another universe. So maybe our whole universe is a junior high school science experiment of some super intelligent junior high school student in another universe, and maybe she won't get such a good grade given the way things are going.
But Richard Dawkins isn't convinced.
When you make a simulated world, and there are crude ones like Second Life, there has to be a physics built into it.
Yes.
And when you drop things, they fall, and when you throw them up and catch them, it works. But you can violate that physics. I mean, the pimply youth doing the simulation can somehow just at will change the physics, and you could suddenly fly, as indeed you can in Second Life. We don't see that.
Another argument is that civilizations never become advanced enough to make simulations before wiping themselves out. Therefore, it's impossible. But the characteristics of quantum mechanics are exactly what we would expect to see in a simulation. There's a limit to the resolution with which we can observe the universe. It just becomes fuzzy, like pixels on a TV screen if you get too close. Again, suggesting that we could be trapped inside a complex video game. Subatomic particles like quarks also resemble the codes that correct for errors in computers.
So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
Into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code?
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
You might feel denigrated that your life is just a character in a video game, that we have no real free will, and that our behavior is programmed. But think of it this way. If our civilization is a computer simulation, if we're all living in the Matrix, at least it means we have a creator.
Wow.
But another possibility is that if we keep advancing and assuming everything in the physical world can be simulated, eventually we'll simulate ourselves. Every synapse in the entire human brain for everyone on Earth. Getting enough computing power to run billions of ancestor simulations could be a problem, but Bostrom thinks we'd send tiny self-replicating robots to other planets, which would turn the planet into a huge computer, and some of the simulations would start making their own simulations. In this scenario, there are billions of universes that are indistinguishable from our own. That means that chances are, we are in one of the simulated universes. And given the other possibility, which is that human civilization has an inevitable ceiling, Elon Musk thinks we better hope that we're in a simulation.
Either we're going to create simulations that are indistinguishable from reality, or civilization will cease to exist. Those are the two options.
There is one other possibility. Maybe future humans just don't want to run ancestor simulations. Maybe they think it's unethical, because there is a tremendous amount of suffering in the world, and that suffering would still feel real to simulated humans. Or maybe they have other priorities. So to recap, there are three possibilities. 1. Humans go extinct before we're able to run a simulation this big. 2. Humans don't run simulations because it's wrong or boring. Number 3. Elon Musk thinks that there's only a tiny chance we are in scenario 1 or 2. The philosopher Nick Bostrom thinks it's more like a 20% chance that we're in a simulation, but if you're not into futuristic predictions, Bostrom thinks this argument provides other rewards. He says, it suggests naturalistic analogies to certain traditional religious conceptions. In other words, if we're living in a simulation, there is a higher level being, but it's some version of us. This leads to a rabbit hole of conversations.
I want to tell you, click on whatever show you dig, and, subscribe to the host, and then the host will get paid for every month that you stay on board. You can go back to the archives and pull up information and use it for research. There's a million ways you can do it, and there's a million ways you can also support. One of the things is we're on iHeartRadio. You can get the iHeartRadio app. You can listen to us in your car. You can listen to us anywhere you go, anywhere, anytime. You can have it right here. Your protection from deception, Truth Frequency Radio and truthfrequencyradio.com. And, you know, I just have to say one more time, Chris and Sheree, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do a show on the network. I think it's a really fantastic place to be. And when I'm not on the radio, I'm listening to Truth Frequency. So, anyways, that's where I'm coming from.
The windows of my soul are made of one-way glass. Don't bother looking into my eyes. If there's something you want to know, just ask. I got a deadbolt straw. Where I'm going is clear. I don't have time for you to wonder. I'll just tell you why I'm here. Cause I know the biggest crime is just to throw up your hands. Say this has nothing to do with me. I just want to live as comfortably as I can. You gotta look outside your eyes. You gotta think outside your brain. You gotta walk outside your life to where the neighborhood changes. Tell me who's your boogeyman. That's who I will be. You don't have to like me for who I am. See what you're made of, by what you make of me. You know, I think it's absurd that you think I am the derelict daughter. You know, I fight fire with words. Words are hotter than flames. Words are wetter than wood. Friends all over this country, friends in other countries too. I got friends I haven't met yet, I got friends I never know. I got a whole life to do something, and that's not very long. Why don't you give me a call when you decide you're willing to fight for what you think is real, for what you think is right.
Thoroughly, and that's the great thing, man.
That's a good thing to use mind control for, to make people have a good time, I think.
Absolutely. I mean,
if you're going to have a good time.
Where's the downside?
When I snap my fingers, you will obey our every command.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. You know what I realized? Ignorance is bliss.
This is the dimension of imagination.
Yo.
Will be implanted into the body